My name is Alex Sanchez. I was involved with MS-13, and this is how crime works. Gang violence comes in all shapes and forms. I ended up going to prison. I got shot at. I got deported. The crimes that I committed took me to a place that's ugly, but I learned and came out strong. I came to the United States in 1979 and experienced a culture shock and then a culture clash with other ethnic groups, especially even Mexican amongst Latino groups. I started seeking ways in which to defend myself. And in middle school, I was introduced to the Mara Salvatrucha Stoners, 13. The initiation into the gang, it always is through a beating. They call it jumping in English, or in Spanish, brincado, which is getting beaten up, right, by 4 or more people. This is part of what you expect if in the warfare, is that you will get beat up. You will suffer violence, right? And that's the initiation of getting jumped in, is violence. I ended up joining what's called the Normandy Locals clique. Initially, it was all about protection, being there for each other. It was 7 of us, 2 women and 5 guys, and we were all homeless. Shortly thereafter, we have our first friend that was killed. We call him Rocky, from the Normandy Locals clique, and that basically brought in this element of vengeance, of getting back to those that hurted us. Around 85, 86, there was an influx of weapons coming into the United States, especially Los Angeles, with the crack epidemic. It was the first time you saw the Uzi, the AK-47. MS-13 didn't have the funds to get those type of weapons. So for us, the cheapest thing that we could use was the machete. It was something culturally relevant to us. It was a tool for harvesting in our country. And eventually we were known as a gang that used the machete in gang warfare. We would go and fight in rumbles, in the park, in the street. You know, some of us would carry knives. Back in the day, a chain, right? I myself got arrested for crimes carrying a concealed weapon. You know, I was on my way to shoot somebody and I got stopped by the police and they found a gun. I would say divine intervention, I don't know. I probably would have killed somebody, or probably would be in prison doing life, like many of the folks that I go see. The violence that I used was the way that I used to release that pain that I felt inside. I was that angry boy, and I became an angry man. And it took me a long time to realize that I can make a change. I had tattoos on my body, on my fingers, on my arms. I ended up getting 3 dots, which was like La Vida Loca, the crazy life. Then I ended up getting the gang name tattooed across my chest. For more traditional gangs, they would put their gang name or a girlfriend's name on their eyebrows. But to start getting tattooed all your face for the MS-13 was something different. The more tattoos you had on, is the more committed you were to letting people know that I'm here, I'm in your face. I went through the painful process of getting tattoo removal. You know, it was difficult for me because I felt like a coward doing it, that I was letting go of so many things that I have done and things that I believed in, but that was part of the process. You know, the relationship that MS-13 with the Barrio 18th Street goes way back to the 80s. We, for the most part, were in the same blocks as their neighborhood was, but we also maintained close relationship. It was mostly because the 18th Street neighborhood in the area was composed from a lot of immigrants, mostly Central American and Salvadoran. But in 1992, Shaggy from the Western Locals was shot and killed by members of the 18th Street. And that's what severed the relationships. Many people started dying, primarily because everybody knew each other's hideouts. 18th Street was a lot bigger than MS-13, still is in the area. And so they were more connected with other gangs as well. It brought in other Chicano neighborhoods to target us. I got called in and said, "Hey, Alex, be ready because you can't, trust them anymore because they're gonna want to kill you guys." It was a cruel war. It was a difficult war. There have been points where they're like being called like a temporary truce and whatnot, especially in El Salvador, but also in 1993 in Los Angeles, there was a truce amongst all the Latino gangs that actually reduced violence, but the violence has not gone back to the levels we saw prior to 1993. Hay muchos motos que han salido desde el inicio de la pandilla, como la Mara con machete. Esta de mata, viola, es solo una manera en cual la pandilla demuestra temor. Sin embargo, las pandillas no necesariamente usan esas cosas como para ejercer este control. Digamos, en California, por seguro, está prohibido las violaciones. Alguien que cae por algo así, lo matan adentro o lo tratan de matar, ¿verdad? Las otras pandillas o la misma pandilla. If you just live on the sides and do what you're told and represent the neighborhood well, then you'll be okay. If you break the rules, right, then there is punishment. There are some that are judged to death, especially those that collaborate with law enforcement, those that become snitches or tell on their brothers. But I have not seen that there's like a task force of gang members that are going around and looking at every address that you lived in to go target you and kill you. Most of the time, folks that die that way are because they come back to the block. MS-13 is known as Mara Salvatrucha. You can say MS-13, MS, La Mara, right? You can have different references to it, even alluding to like the garra or the claw, which is the gang sign, right? Well, you have the devil's horn, the two fingers that is used to also in the heavy metal rock scene. People have transformed it. They put both hands to make an M or S and so on. MS-13 or MS-13 during the time was into that heavy metal scene. Whether it was Slayer, Iron Maiden, or Megadeth, that music really was how we let out. It wasn't that we were evil devil worshipers. There were some individuals within the gang structure that were into La Santa Muerte, for instance. You have people from all denominations in the gang. Some people that believe in Christ. So it's a community overall. That's what you call the barrio. So in some ways, being in the gang, is like being some sort of religion. In 86, I ended up getting arrested and went to Central Juvenile Hall. Once you're in prison, you have to defend yourself, and you're known by other rival gang members as somebody that stood up for himself. So it became a rites of passage to rise up through the ranks like that. Eventually, I made it to prison in 1991 and went back to prison at least 3 times. And in 1994, I ended up getting deported. After 12 years of a civil war, the war was over in El Salvador. So many people were getting deported. My first thought was, I'm going to start fresh. I don't have a criminal record. I speak English, so maybe I could get into the tourist business or something to that nature, right? I wasn't planning on going over there and gangbanging or getting caught up or dying down there. But that changed immediately once I got to the airport. As I was going to the terminal, I saw the gang riding on the hillside, and it said MS-13. But as we go down the highway, I ended up seeing on the wall, on the brick wall, the Roman numerals XVIII, which means 18th Street. And then I realized, wow, they're here too. So the rivalry must continue. And I started to looking around and being more alert as to where I was at and who was beside me. So shortly after arriving in El Salvador, I ended up getting death threats. A death squad came out called the Sombra Negra, or the Black Shadow. And their mission was to eradicate the gang violence that was rising. I had two people with me, two gang members that were young. They had been child soldiers in the war, and they were looking up to me. I had two grenades, and I gave them to them. I've never used a grenade, and I said I'd probably blow myself up. But these two guys, they know how to use a grenade. So I carry my gun, and they carried the grenades. And that's how we went to different places, because I was under the threat that I could be killed or shot at or even try to be kidnapped from these death squads. The level of violence was probably quadruple from whatever I had experienced in the United States. And that was residue from the war. So you would see gang members, using that type of in-your-face violence, that was used during the war. I couldn't go to my home anymore, so I was on the run. I ended up eventually deciding to flee El Salvador because I felt death around me. Coming up as another immigrant, I got kidnapped in Oaxaca by the Federales and almost died in the desert and crossing Matamoros into Brownsville, Texas. So I have this knowledge of tragedy of what I saw of other migrants coming up all the way from South America. It's not something that I would wish on anyone. To be targeted, kidnapped, held for ransom, and possibly killed just for coming into the United States. But the desperation of what our countries go through, forces people to have to put themselves in such an ordeal. The only place that I could go back was to my old block. I was tired of going to prison. I was tired of a life of violence and looking over my back. And I was able to talk to the neighborhood and they gave me a pass because they seen that I was working and taking care of business. And I kind of still lived in the block, but I wasn't getting involved in none of their gang activities. There is in a specific, I would say, leadership structure, but it's whoever feels that void in that moment in the neighborhood where there's no clear individual. Most of the time, nobody really wants to take a leadership of a gang because you become a prime target by law enforcement. They're not a secret group of people that are trying to make millions and millions of dollars. They're disorganized structures that work on what crimes they could benefit from. In Central America, Honduras, Guatemala, you have individuals that might take on, into a criminal entity such as, being part of a cartel or getting involved in human trafficking. But it's not something that's a direct goal of the gang to be something like that. So what El Salvador has done right now with creating the biggest prison in the continent, in the smallest country in the continent, is that it fits over 40,000 people. In a place called Tecoluca, the prison is called Secot, and they have been transferring all these people there that they have designated as gang members to be incarcerated for life. These individuals will never set foot out of those prisons, but in a coffin. And that's what their message has been from the president. We have seen this before. El Salvador has had zero tolerance initiatives with the Cero Tolerancia, Mano Dura initiatives that created mass incarceration, and it didn't reduce violence. This prison is basically going to be holding all these people that have been judged unjustly based on just their affiliation. They're being sentenced to life in prison. In the history of mass incarceration, especially in California, that has over 33 prisons, this has been a failure in regards to reducing violence. So we know that mass incarcerating people is not going to bail us out of the problems that created all this problem in the first place. At this moment, we have the military of El Salvador tackling the problem. They're arresting, they're on the streets, they have roadblocks in every other mile, to see who goes by. You have local police, the National Civil Police, but you also have underground organizations such as the death squads, the exterminators that they call themselves. Before it was the Black Shadow. Now is this exterminadores that are social cleansing groups that target specific people for assassination, basically. So I think that politicians really need to start thinking, what is the exit strategy out of this mass incarceration and having the country militarized as they do right now, and start really focusing also in the prevention piece that has always been neglected by every politician, every presidency before that. The Mara Salvatrucha started in the late 70s into the early 80s in what's considered the Koreatown Pico Union area of Los Angeles. And it started because of the mass migration of immigrants coming from Central America, unaccompanied minors and children who came here and suffered this culture clash with different ethnicities, right? The migration flow started impacting other states into like Long Island, in the 2000s, the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area, places like Houston, Texas, where there's a big Salvadoran community. But in the United States, prison became part of that, of the continuation of engagement of the gang. It didn't stop the gang by incarcerating all these people, but it influenced the gang now to grow and connect. Once the war ended in El Salvador, the government of the United States started mass deporting people to not only El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras. And that's what started the expansion of MS-13 in those countries. Homies Unidos started in El Salvador in 1996 by members of gangs that had been deported to El Salvador. Many of the members, I knew them from the neighborhood, from the gang, or I had done time in prison with them. They invited me to a conference in Santa Cruz, and that's how we started creating programs in the Pico Union and in Koreatown initially. It wasn't easy in the beginning. We really didn't have the trust of law enforcement. In 2000, I became part of the Rampart scandal, which they had arrested a gang unit officer stealing kilos of cocaine out of the evidence room. And then he flipped, and then he told about all the crimes that the gang unit was committing, things that we were saying that they were doing in the courtrooms, but the jury didn't believe us over a cop. I became part of the Rampart scandal behind being a key witness, an alibi for a 14-year-old kid that was being charged with murder, in which he was at the church during our program during the time that the murder took place. So it couldn't have been him. And that's when the same officers that arrested him came after me, and they arrested me for the sole purpose of turning me over to immigration to be deported. So that developed into this new scandal within immigration during the time and the police of how they used immigration as a tool to get rid of people they didn't want around. And then eventually I was released and won political asylum in 2002. But the LAPD had not forgotten me, and were not happy that I sued them, right? And they settled. And in 2009, they came after me again. They put me in a federal RICO case. The charges were dismissed, and I was able to restart again because Homies Unidos lost everything. We lost the office, we lost the funding, we lost the staff. So I, organized again, and now, we have 11 staff, doing a lot of work in the community. having been part of that myself, it's like I know that I'm on a hit list, on a target list by the federal government, the LAPD, and they're just looking for ways in which they can get me indicted. So I have to walk a thin line everywhere I go. I have to watch everything I say. Well, the media has really given a lot of publicity to the MS-13 gang that comes down through the state, especially when you have a president that directly names a particular gang like MS-13 and the repercussions that has behind it. Because once a president mentions something, it's telling their departments to go after this particular group. MS-13 is one of the most vulnerable gangs to go after because they're targeted by the immigration rhetoric, the bad hombre. One individual commits a crime, it's in every newspaper. While other gangs such as the Crips, the Bloods, 18th Street, the Latin Kings, who in some cases are bigger than the MS-13, are not have coverage like this one because they're mostly either Puerto Rican or Mexican American or African American, which makes them U.S. citizens. And nothing feeds gangs as labeled them as the world's most dangerous, as the city's most dangerous. The mayor, Antonio Villaraigosa, at one point said that they put out a list of the top 10 worst gangs in Los Angeles, and every gang wanted to be part of it. It was like, hey, I'm dangerous too. So it creates the system of trying to see which gang is number one, and every gang wants to be number one. You get to a point where you get tired of being chased by the police. You get tired, of being called by your mother and saying, hey, I'm raising your children. When are you going to raise your own children? So you start trying to figure out, like, I'm getting too old for this, or I want to be more responsible. People age out. People, some of them become Christians. Some of them, try to study and get a degree or something and start their own businesses. You have many gang members for MS-13 that are pastors that have turned their lives around and now they're preaching. I'm still called a gang member, right? And I say, well, I am. I am part of it. I work in those communities, so I am. I cannot say that I'm not longer a gang member because that's how society has labeled me, that I'm a gang member for life. But am I a gang member that's calmed down? Yes. I'm somebody that's looking out, helping out now the children of many of my friends that are in prison. Yes. In my life, I've done a lot of things, a lot of good things, but also bad things. And I regret those things that I've done. But what I'm doing is trying to give back to the community what I once took. The organization, Homies Unidos, we're not stopping gangs. We're reducing violence. Law enforcement is incarcerating them. We're trying to save as many as we can by helping them once they're ready to do their lives. Having a nonprofit, you don't have that, 2-bedroom, 2-story house with a pool. No, you're not going to have those things. I'm able to support myself and my family in the little, humble place that I have. That's not even mine. I'm renting. But I think that a nonprofit always struggling with day-to-day cost. We'll love to have folks that are well off, that have the funding, be able to give us what we need to expand.